So thanks very much for taking the time out, investing in yourself, and I hope what we're about to present is useful to you. For those of you who I've met with before or who may be active clients now, you've likely heard me saying some of this before, but I think, with a new mix of people, a fresh set of faces, we're going to be able to bring some new, fresh perspective to what we talk about today. So I encourage you to participate. So we're going to define what we mean by unstoppable unity. It might be a little different to how you're defining it, so we'll level set there. We're then going to really zero in on these 3 trust drivers. That's what we're here to do, and where I think I'm able to provide the most amount of value to you today. And so we're going to spend a fair amount of time on that. We're then going to talk about application and how you are going to apply these, or how you can look to apply these, and what might be some of the constraints against that. The reason that I'm here and want to do this is because I like to see leaders succeed and really reach their full potential. That's what Michael and Kate and I are all about, is helping teams focus, achieve momentum, and really design the business experience that they want. So if you stay till 11:55, I'm going to gift my favorite book, or one of my favorite books, I should say. It's a dangerous book. It's a dangerous book because I find it's very, very useful for a person who might be right on the cusp of needing a coach. And I find that this book is really helpful in self-coaching, as well as becoming more of that coach leader. So if you haven't seen this Stanier book, it's fantastic. The Coaching Habit is one that I really enjoyed. I recommend to all my clients, and I'm going to be giving away a crisp new copy to one of you today, 5 minutes to the hour. So if you stick on, you have a chance at landing that. So as we get started here, this is the first thing that I'd like you to do, the first activity that we're going to do. 1 or 2 words I'd like you to describe for me, from your perspective, what a unified team gets or achieves that teams that are not unified, or groups that are not unified, do not. So what is the benefit, or the first thing that pops to your mind, does a unified team get? And I'm going to be looking at the chat here, and then we're going to read a few of those out, and then we're going to move forward. So just take a moment, 1 or 2 words, and fire it in the chat, please. Okay, so trust and unity would lead to innovation, quicker resolve, resolution perhaps, or more resolve. They're able to take action, that they're able to identify and target the competition. Loyalty. So we'll get a few of those coming in. Clarity. All of these are true. And when you look at any of those suggestions, faster results. So when you look at any of those suggestions, they have a dollar value attached to them, whether it's innovation, or it's resolutions, or it's loyalty and retention. These are things that we can attach real savings to. So besides just being part of a great team, there's business objectives that we're going for here. And for each of you, identifying how this pays back is important. So keep that in your mind and listen to what other people are saying there. When we talk about unstoppable unity, I want to just clarify this point. When we look at those 2 pictures to the side, unity is being part of the school. It's being part of moving with others and having a common purpose, whether it's sardines that are trying to bunch together so they look like a larger fish and protect themselves. Okay, that's rather simplistic, and we're not talking about swarming here, but it's much more that than the sardines that are in the can. Unity is not simply proximity. It's not being jammed together. It really is that feeling that I'm with these people doing this thing, that I'm there and I'm present, that their mission is my mission, and we go forward with that sense. We also use the word togetherness as something that we talk about quite a bit when we look at high functioning teams. This unity, when we talk about unstoppable unity, it's really on the end of a maturity continuum. And so, it's the destination. It's where we're heading towards. Now, it's not the end. Once a team is unified, they can do all sorts of things. And, if you've sat on a team for a while where you already have achieved some measure of unity, you can build and build and build on that. But it starts with trust. It starts with building that essential trust that allows us to be open so that we can have unburdened collaboration, that we can then achieve higher levels of performance. And once that starts paying dividends, that sense of mutual success and achievement reinforces being part of that group. And that's a really big deal, because that means that it's actually working. And there are very few teams that can stay unified in the face of repeated nonsensical failure over and over and over again. So it's important to make sure that the groundwork is laid so that we can have those results and we can achieve that unity. I guess the other way that we would say it is that we don't start simply with get unity and achieve results. Results are part of reinforcing unity. We start with trust. The other reason we do it is because trust can be given. It's something that as leaders you have direct license over establishing. There's no shortcuts to unity. That has to be earned. That has to be something that we layer on, and that's an individual realization and experience. You can put the conditions in place, but you can't make it happen. Whereas trust can be started quite early, and it's completely within your power to direct the quality of trust that you create. So this is what we're going to be talking about. As we go forward, one of the things that I'd like you to do is keep pen and pencil, or paper and pen handy, and I'd like you to jot down specific words or ideas that we're sharing, because we're going to use them later on, that resonate with you individually. So write down when something rings your bell. And when it does, as we go through and we could dive deeper into trust, write down what really triggers you. Okay. So when we talk about trust, the easiest way to do it is to break it into its constituent parts. And the model that I like the most, and any of you who I've coached, you'll hear me talk in these terms, is really this authenticity, empathy, logic model. All three of these things are very, very important. The reason why this model is great is because it helps us actually look at our own brand and how we bring trust to an organization, and get clear on where we're strong and where we might be, in Francis Frey's words, wobbling, where we may have oscillation and where we may not be as consistent or as high performing as we would like. Everybody with me so far? Maybe just give me a thumbs up in the chat or something. Let me know that you're on the window. I can see some of you there. Great. So we're going to start with empathy, move to authenticity, and then we're going to get to logic at the end. So here's our deep dive. Again, write down anything that you find is meaningful, or go ahead and throw it in the chat if something really rings your bell. So empathy, here's a common definition that I like. Empathy is something that, as a concept, most of us understand. It's the ability to appreciate and sense other people's emotions, but also then to take the world in from wearing their shoes, or from being able to appreciate the intensity with which they're feeling something without necessarily feeling that intensity yourself. So you can put yourself in their shoes and you can begin to experience the world, at least theoretically, from what they're feeling. It's not the same as sympathy. It doesn't mean you're feeling everything with them as they're feeling it. It's more about being conscious of where they are. When we look at empathy in a workplace or within a team, there's a couple things that I'd like you to think, and I've just thrown up a couple of sound bites here. These are things that you might be saying, or you might hear others say, or you might, the hair on the back of your neck stands up because you think they're saying it. Statements like, are they in it for me? Right? Are they really here for me? Are they showing up, and are they doing what they're doing for me? An example is, well, I'm doing this presentation. Am I actually here for you? Am I concerned about what you are taking away from this? Or am I solely here to, promote myself and feel good about myself or something? Or am I actually trying to get you to a place? So that's one of the things that you're going to be using to decide whether or not you trust me in this virtual setting. Another thing people say is, am I understood? Are they actually taking the time to listen and understand what I think? That's a fairly simple concept. When we look in terms of how this shows up in organizations and workplaces where they've really got it nailed, we see that we've got systems that are strong in terms of communication. We've got one-on-one time that's honored and protected. We've got tables and meeting spaces that are bringing the right people into the discussion at the right time. And when you are at that table, that your expertise is honored and listened to, that we have really understood what makes each person tick and what's important to them, and that their own development and their own life and their own sense of achievement rides right alongside the group's sense of achievement. There's lots of theories that go around making sure that we always balance the needs of the company with the needs of the individual. And when it's out of balance, it's one of the key sources of fear. And if we have fear, we're never going to reach unity, that's for sure. So that's what you'll see. When it gets down to leaders and how they approach things, the key behaviors that I see, and this is where I'd like you to reflect on your own leadership ability, is the ability to recognize interests of others as being on par with our own, to really be able to step into a room and gauge how people are feeling. And if you make a mistake as a leader, to just own up to it and own it and go forward. There's also some behaviors that are much more easily habitualized, and that would be showing up for meetings on time, making sure that you follow up and that you're tracking through whether or not people have done things, and holding yourself accountable as well. And then when you are entering into spaces, say what's on your mind, speak up, and raise the level of chatter. You're going to hear me say chatter a couple of times throughout this presentation. It comes from my bias being a chef back in the day, and noting that a kitchen that's full of chatter and where people are taking time to pay attention to where other people are at, is always much more high functioning than one that's silent. I'm going to go through these ones fairly quickly. I'll just take no, we're going to go through to the end, and then I'm going to stop. I'll ask you the question that I need to ask you. So authenticity. So here, is it real? Are we getting something that's not not what's at the core? So are you getting the real Tim today, or are you getting some sort of facsimile? Are you getting some sort of act? That's going to be really telling whether or not you are willing to trust me. And for those of you who haven't met me yet, that's one of the things that you're wondering. You're looking for indicators of whether or not you're getting this real guy or you're getting some show. Authenticity, when we're trying to figure out whether or not there's a challenge to authenticity and trust in that way, you're going to hear that question. Am I getting the real you? Do you have some sort of side agenda? Are they with me? Are they part of a different camp? I always like to say, from sort of the dawn of time, humans are wired to view people in two different ways. They're either sources of food and warmth, shelter and protection, or they're a tiger in the grass, or they're, an opposing tribe that's come in to steal what I've stored for the winter. I mean, we're wired to think that way. And so the friend and foe thinking is really big when it comes to authenticity challenges. Workplaces that are rich with authenticity tend to have psychological safety as one of their key values. It's a big topic, and if you're not familiar with psychological safety, the work of Amy Edmondson is really top-notch on this, and I'm always happy to answer a few questions at the end here. We have, when we're scared, when we have risks, when we have worries, they're openly put into the middle of the table. Meetings tend to be dialogues. They tend to be a back and forth, and they work very, very well in terms of being a conversation. They're not downloads. This is one of the key things that we work on with teams, is that if they find that you're sitting there and your meeting is simply happening around you, and you're not talking about the exceptions, that you know what, you might be into a monologue or into just this download behavior, when what you really need is to be leveraging everybody's true talents. And that's where we start to see this meeting excellence happen. As we said, vulnerability is the norm. And then you see naturally, not forced, people's work lives starting to intersect with their personal lives. Now, people are going to have varying degrees of privacy, but the work lives begin to bleed into the personal lives and back and forth. They no longer become separated because they aren't a threat to one another, is the short way to put it. When you're able to inspire authenticity, we see leaders that provide direct, actionable feedback. They're very forthright. We often say that they have a healthy disrespect for authority, or a healthy skepticism for authority, or a healthy disrespect for policies and rules that don't make sense. So that's something that you will see when you have people starting to be really authentic, is that they're going to ask questions. We see leaders that have created teams that are very, very diverse. They've got different life experiences. They've got different opinions, different ways of thinking about things. And we see teams that it's just fine to ask for help when you need it. And I go back to that example of the kitchen, when somebody is in the weeds and needs to put their hand up and say, chef, I'm in trouble. It's a chance for everybody to swing in and help. If the person stays silent, the kitchen is going to bomb, and you're going to have a terrible night, because on teams, silence is not golden, it's deadly. We get into logic as we round the third and final pillar here. This is the rationality that things are that things can be looked and they can be analyzed, they can be appreciated, and they can be questioned easily. Can we analyze and see the truth of this claim? Logical risks are going to show up in, does this make sense? Can I understand what this person is saying? If people can't interface with what you're saying, if they can't compute, then you need to slow down. You need to try a different approach. If you don't understand what other people are saying, because remember, this is also how you diagnose issues, you may need to slow them down or get them to articulate it in a different way. So we see several different behaviors and several different conditions in cultures where logic is rich. And one of the key that I'll draw your eye to here is storytelling. The ability to not just define and scope something, but to actually, draw a narrative and explain what this means and really engage a person into the story of why something is important. If you can incorporate stories into your leadership, then you can usually approach highly tactical, logical situations with an air of openness and welcome in that contribution, right? The rest, I think, are relatively self-explanatory, but when we approach things logically, we don't tend to over-emotionalize and run to blame. Instead, we start to look at things more objectively, and we go forward with a spirit of growth. As leaders, there's a couple of things. Leaders who are inspiring logic aren't just speaking logically, but they're demonstrating logical behavior. As I say, they're showing up for meetings on time. They are making sure that they are following up when they say they're going to follow up. Their tactics and their approach to leadership is transparent. It's predictable. It's something that people can say, I may not always agree with it, but I understand how they get there. It doesn't mean they have to be just like me, but I understand how they operate, and I can then work with it. I can then leverage it. So that's a very quick spin through these three important pillars. Before we go on and we talk about application for a moment, I want to just invite you to respond one more time. When we think of empathy, authenticity, or logic, maybe just share with the group here, which would be the area that you would sense you need to focus on? Which would be the area that you would want to work on, that you think bringing either through your own leadership or through the culture of your team would add the most value? So we see storytelling and logic. Yep, logic, lots of logic. Empathy. Whole bunch of votes for logic. Okay, well, that's good. Empathy is a big one. Logic is a big one. And it's funny how the tactical behind logic can often be the most trying. And so let's talk about that for a minute. As concepts, logic is simple, empathy is simple, authenticity is simple. Nothing that we've shown now is going to be so mind-blowing that it's going to radically alter how you understand logic, empathy, or authenticity. But it's important that we break it down so that we can approach, well, where do we now need to focus and what can we improve on? And it's in that chunking, that breaking up and then targeting in on the specific areas where we can make a difference quickly, that we find the power in this model. Both we can do this personally, or we can use it on a team scale to say, we've got a trust challenge. How can we deal with this? But if everything's so simple, why doesn't it just happen naturally all the time? The application of these rules, or not rules, but the application of this thinking is not a no-brainer. It doesn't just happen without work. The reason is because we come in with a bunch of structures that we've had from birth until now. And so this is the first time it's ever been unveiled, the TWE birth model. This isn't a parenting tool. Anyway, so there are a number of different tensions that are going to come and stop us from acting in the way that we want to act, in ways that build trust and unity. And these include beliefs, identities, our responsibility and sense of what our duties are, traditions that we need to abide by, and habits that we've established. Every one of those things can provide a tension that pulls us away from trying something new or doing it consistently. Many of you who've been in coaching sessions with me will be familiar with the term bright, shiny. I can give you a bright, shiny thing. You can take these behaviors that we've listed and go out and try to employ them. And often trying is never a bad thing. You try it, but you're going to feel tension building up against it. The reason we have these internal and these external tensions is because trying to do one thing well may stop us or move us away from doing something else well. Understanding the sources of these tensions, and we're going to talk about them in a minute, can help us direct our energies. If we don't deal with them, trying something new, say building a more logical experience for your staff, great. So we're going to come in, we're going to have a meeting that's going to take more time to present something logically. Well, you know what? I also need to do things efficiently. And so suddenly I'm at odds with these two desires, with these two urges. That can create wobble. That wobble can get so severe that it'll tear teams apart. It definitely, when we're oscillating, it can threaten trust. Have any of you, just in the chat with a yes or a no, have any of you experienced this type of oscillation where you try to do something and then it seems that life is pulling you back from it? So the good news here. So here's the silver lining. The silver lining is these tensions, once you're fluent in them, once you understand where your tensions rest, you can actually change and reorganize them so that those tensions are not pulling against you, but instead pulling you in the direction that you want to go. It's not the easiest work in the world, but it's completely possible. And once you understand the basic premise of it, it's not hard to pull, to organize your life so that you're being pulled into the state that you want to be. Doing that makes achieving trust and whatever the vision for trust within your team is, makes it possible. It doesn't only make it possible, it makes it the path of least resistance. It makes it the thing that is the easiest thing to do, not the hardest thing to do. So the last note before we sort of open up to wider questions would be this, is that creating unstoppable unity is something that we have to work towards. It's definitely on that continuum, but the very first step and the foundation that you need to lay behind it is going to be trust. choosing to lead with trust, even if it's unearned trust, even if you're extending it first and letting people do it. And by the way, we're not talking about doing it without good judgment, but by extending trust, you can create space that then people can begin to find purpose, they can find success, they can explore how to bring their best selves to work and how you can bring your best self to work. And then we can achieve more. As soon as the results begin to roll in, you know what? Doing the right thing, winning feels good, and we're going to do more of it. So my last question to you in the chat would be, is there anything here that you read today that you could take away? And this is, anything that rang your bell or resonated with you that you would feel empowered to now go away and try some new things? What is one idea that sticks out from the concepts that we just very, very briefly shared? Their mission is my mission. Yeah, that's a big one. And it's a great thermometer to apply to your team. It's actually a fantastic thing to ask your team if you have enough trust and openness built up in your team to ask it. Yeah, feeling safe to really go into it and feel comfortable with what you're sharing. Yeah, seeking first to understand, listening to understand, hearing the perspectives of others. It's not something that can ever be understated. Stop and listen and then react. Sure, stop and listen, take a breath, and then react. Absolutely. So we're going to begin to open the mics now, and we're going to have a bit of a conversation around how we can actually apply these to your specific situations. So Michael, if I can have you go ahead and open the mics. That is the end of the formal presentation, and we're going to go into some Q&A. So the Unity is really the follow-on, though it's a great, for you as a leader, it's a great goal to set in mind and to make sure that you're aiming at. I mean, that's what you want to start to see, is indicators that the team is indeed uniting and coming closer together. In terms of deploying them, my suggestion would be that you, first of all, look at where you as a leader tend to have oscillation. You look in that area and you say, what do I think I have the biggest challenge with? And then drive it down to, how do I see myself demonstrating the opposite of what I want to be doing? What's contrary to my brand? And then we, dive deep on, do I understand what's at odds with this thing? And can I, what's at odds with me trying to exhibit the behavior that I want to exhibit? So we can, depending on how open you want to be, you can share if there's any more specificity to that, but what's actually holding me back? And then we look to reorganize how we approach the thing that's holding us back so that we can remove the opposing tension. Because otherwise you're always stuck between these two forces, and you're going to move towards where you want to be until this tension grows up, becomes too big, and then you snap back into the previous behavior. So you have to understand and reorganize the structures that you're dealing with personally. That's from the internal perspective. As a leader, you may have a trust challenge with somebody else. It's the same kind of challenge, but then you have to approach it from more the leader coach model and take a look at, I've asked you to do this a few times, or I'm looking to see this behavior. What do you think what's the biggest barrier that you have against doing that? Or let's talk a little bit about what you think is making that difficult for you. Does that help, or am I in the right place? Okay. Great. Does that raise any questions for anybody else, or would anybody else like a little bit more in terms of what would be the next steps personally or with a team? We have a question coming in through the chat. If this only works with small team level, or if you can aim for the whole company to apply these principles and feel united. You can absolutely aim to create conditions that make this easier at the company level. It never negates the responsibility of the individual and the responsibility of the team. Those have to be functioning at the same time. But at a company level, you can create environments that are much more conducive to unified teams and successful leadership than elsewise. However, it does require a coordination, or at least a very strong maverick group within the company, to set some new norms and to really challenge where, policy, maybe legacy beliefs, or bad habits, or policies that aren't being followed are constantly being challenged. Do I think that mavericks need to be senior leaders? And probably not from HR. I think that a maverick can show up anywhere in an organization. I think becoming we have this concept about doing the wrong thing and then getting rewarded for it. Being a maverick that's able to stand up to something that doesn't make sense is, I think it's accessible to anybody, but you have to find your mojo, and you have to approach it relatively strategically. It requires definitely looking at what we just looked at in terms of a trust pyramid, not having any trust challenges against yourself with the major decision makers. They need to be able to go look at your backyard and make sure that you're still human, but you've got to be relatively in tune. You got to be authentic, empathetic, and logical. Then you have to take a look at, well, how do I create a groundswell of change? Larger organizations, mega organizations, obviously this is a little more challenging, but I guess what I would say is, as soon as you get good at describing and defining how creating trust among your team, your collaborators within the organization, perhaps even your partners, perhaps even your partners and their competitors, if you can demonstrate that, and you can do it from a business case, and you can outline how you are impacting schedule and budget, then people are very willing to listen. We go back to the storytelling aspect of this, and these big changes, there's no better way to make them noticed than by making them really accessible and really desirable. But it's got to be the truth. It can't be spin. We see a lot of these corporate, comms and communications and videos and podcasts and everything. And yeah, they're good, but some of them are really inauthentic. It's just marketing, right? It's very different to go down and talk to the people in the field and see what's actually happening, and hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, and then be able to marry that with a logical financial incentive. Because at the end of the day, those things have to be in balance. The needs of the few have to be balanced with the needs of the many, right? The needs of the individual have to be in balance with the needs of the corporation. Does anybody else have any thoughts or feelings? Now, we can move beyond this subject too. If you've got just general curiosity in the space of leadership or culture, performance, team, happy to take those as well. The first area that I would focus in is, by listening to the story, what's the transformation that you're going to undertake? That's the very first thing that I would, if I'm doing it to motivate people towards a certain aim. When you're constructing a story, the way you're going to tell it, there's four things that I'd like you to focus on. The first is define for yourself first. And this is even before you open your mouth or write anything down. This is really getting in touch with what you want to say and zeroing in on why it's important to you to communicate this at all. Because if you land that, and you're very, very settled on your own, I don't want to bring in too much Seneca here, but too much, your own why behind why it's important to get this story out there, then it becomes very easy to talk about in a way that's authentic and real. So the first thing is, I'd like you to focus in on the meaning. And if you're thinking of this from almost a workshop perspective, what does it mean to you? What's the most important part of whatever the message is you're about to try to convey, or the opportunity that you're trying to convey? Break meaning down into the characteristics of this change or of this event that you're talking about. What's the cause behind these things? Why is it important? What's the concepts that you need to have communicated? What are the qualities that you're trying to instill? Then there's 3 other things that you need to focus in on round meeting, and these you got to get fluent in. And then when you're in conversation, or you're up against a mic, or you're ad-libbing, you can bounce between these 3 things actively. Just have them in your mind, and you can find natural opportunities to bring them up in conversation or in a presentation. One would be the ultimate one, which is, what's the answer? So what's the solution that this thing is providing? This is the easy one, by the way. Why is this thing important? Okay, so that's the easy one, the answer or the value. But then the next thing that you want to talk about is, you want to go into why is it important? So you want to be able to defend that answer, explain why it matters, put it in context of the wider world, offer evidence and fact. That's sort of the logical piece of it. And the last one, and this is the story within the story, is being able to emotionalize and provide anecdotes. Now, for a leader, anecdotes or tropes or fables are underutilized. And what they do for a leader is, it manages to take a very, very complex issue and boil it down into a nursery rhyme size message that people can understand. So it's one thing for you to say, for me to say to you, it's really important that on your team you ensure you have the right level of chatter and people are communicating openly and honestly and vulnerably and blah, 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 blah. And it's very different than for me to say, hey, you know what, in a kitchen, if you've got 8 pans going on the hot top and you are burning your eggs, it's probably time to stick up your hand and say, I need help, like right now, or everything's going to fall apart. Because immediately we've gone into a very simplified analog for what the complex situation is. So I would say, what are things that you felt and seen? Visualize the thing that you're explaining, and then repeat it as an anecdote or a fable or a small analog. There's some other structures that I think you would want to consider, and it would be, and I'll just rattle these off really quick, is make sure that your story has a hook. Make sure that you are talking about the benefits and the transformation, and make sure you're offering proof. So the hook is a big one when you're getting people interested in listening. And then the benefits, you have to land those for people, otherwise they won't listen to you. One book recommendation I would offer up, and we're going to be doing an open office hour on some of this later, so stay in touch. But the Chip and Dan Heath book, Made to Stick, fantastic book in this space. Okay. They tell the story about how everybody believed there were razor blades in the apples when there was no actual evidence that it had ever happened. But everybody knew somebody who knew somebody, because it was emotionalized. Man, it's terrible to think of a kid biting into a razor blade apple. And it was accessible, and it was real, and everybody knew what Halloween was. And it was, so Chip and Dan Heath, Made to Stick. Okay. Okay, from the email, we have a question. With COVID-19 making remote work on the norm for now and likely into the future, how can leaders effectively practice authenticity and empathy digitally? The number one thing I can say is, if I'm going to give you my top hint, it's don't just begin and end the meeting all about business. Really get into your staff's careers, really get into their personal lives, take some time that's solely dedicated to that. I know that seems like a bit of a gimme, but it's something that we forget really, really often. We see in this framework, we're kind of commoditized down to these little cells, and we're so much more than that. So take time to make sure you're working on the personal relationships. Do we have another question from the group here? Anybody on voice that would like to ask something before I take a couple more from email? Good. Well, we're getting close. We've got 2 minutes left. Okay, so too much content can be overwhelming. I think we were pushing the limits today, personally, but I don't know how you would feel on that. It can be a complex subject, and I want to make sure that for you as leaders, you can see by breaking up the notion of trust. And I guess this is, you know, where I would like to. The last thing I'll leave you with in terms of the content is by breaking it up and by not just simply saying, well, I know trust is important and I think I got a trust challenge, but by really looking at it in its constituent parts, I think people can get very far in turning it around if they're having a challenge. Okay, so that's it. It's 11:57. We're 2 minutes past. We've already done the random draw using the patented TWE spin wheel. The book, the Michael Bungay Stanier book. It's a great book. I encourage you to read it cover to cover, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Michael's going to be following up with a email just to collect your delivery information, everything, so that we can have that sent to you. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. That's it. I sure hope we can catch up one-on-one a little bit later. It was great to see such a turnout for our first event, and have a great day and enjoy your weekend. All the best.